Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IPython developer meeting for Thursday, May 1st. Today, we're mostly getting ready for PyData, which is at Facebook tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday. So this will be a somewhat short meeting, but good to have everyone here. So let me open up the HackPad.
Yeah, so first thing, we merged Thomas's kernel spec
Yay!
PR, so we can start writing kernel specs for the other kernels there. Thomas has one for our kernel, but he hasn't made it public.
Yes, I'll get around to adding that to the kernel repo. And I'm also going to write, the thing that got merged was very much just the base level of the API. So I've added to the IPEP the bits for the REST API for querying kernel specs, which I will work on implementing, and there's going to be a command line interface as well that you can list them and install them.
Good.
Great.
Sounds good. The message spec update PR should be done. It said no activity since last Friday. So that, as far as I'm concerned, that's ready to merge. And the adapter code to make it so that it doesn't break old kernels by opening is also done.
I asked one question on the PR about traceback and metadata, because
adding a metadata error message. I guess.
Yeah.
Sure. It's easy enough.
Actually, I do have one. I've been so busy with other stuff. The priority list that's that's associated with display data
is not in the. It's not there. It's not in the IPEP. It's not in the PR.
Okay, it's not. So it's still set by the front end.
Yeah, that we can have a smaller discussion about that in particular. See if it is even possible to handle a priority in the message correctly. When we talked about it here, it seemed like that would not be possible.
Okay, great.
So, but that can be, because that's not like the renames and things which are major breaking changes.
Right.
We can still do small changes like that, and I still want to do some cleanup on the figure out something about the payloads.
Right. Yeah, that's a step.
But those are smaller things that I don't think are important to get done in one big change.
Okay.
There's the is complete request that we want to add at some point as well.
Yeah, for console like front ends like the Qt console, being able to ask the kernel if when we have implicit execute on enter, being able to ask that question of the kernel rather than, as we do now, lexing Python and assuming that the language is Python, which is not great.
Python, the language is great, but
yeah,
doing the lexing in the front end.
Just write their languages like Python, so that our Lexa works.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, at least the only thing that matters is that when a block is syntactically complete, as long as that's the same, everything else can be different.
Yep.
Yeah. So the plan was to do 2.1 roughly a month after 2.0 with the various bug fixes and things we found. That is today.
Happy May Day!
Yeah. Woo. So I think I'm trying to go through the 2.1 PRs. There's still several open next week, and try to have 2.1 by the end of next week.
Okay. Let me think. And that one 5446 that's linked there is the one that fixes like 6 bugs, right?
Yeah, it's a bunch of give up on Flexbox because Flexbox is untrustworthy.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that fixes that. There's another bug that John and I have been
Oh, yes.
that we found that is, when you find it, it's extremely annoying. That is that if you're in a CodeMirror editor and you have a long line that's wrapped at the right cell boundary, and if your cursor is at the end of that line and you want to press the up key to go to a spot higher in that wrapped line, in master, it always jumps to the very beginning of that line. And if you're at the beginning and you go down, it always jumps to the entire end of that. So basically,
because it treats a wrapped line as a long line.
Mm-hmm.
It does, but it used to not do that, and CodeMirror Master does not do that. It has the editing experience is like it always was, where if you do up, you just go up.
I think that might be some of my changes that introduced that. I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, at least up. I don't quite know about down, but it would make sense that because there's that boundary detection stuff on up in the first line.
Okay.
Because CodeMirror, if you ask CodeMirror what line you're on, it will say you're on the first line.
Yes. No. And it's, but the difficulty with the current situation is that, let's say you have a wrapped line that is 4 lines long. If you want to get to the middle of that text block, you either have to use the mouse or use left or right arrow key and go through all characters.
Mm-hmm.
It basically breaks the keyboard.
No, I think I know how to fix that.
Okay.
So you want to open an issue assign it to Paul?
Yeah.
Or Paul
Okay.
I
assign it to
can
himself?
open an issue here. I'll
Okay. Thanks.
on it.
That's another one that if we can get it for 2.1, that would be great. No, the two things we thought of, one is that maybe our version of CodeMirror has this bug, and we need to update to the latest released.
Well, we can't do that because it's a major...
No, I think there is a backport. There is one more release.
There's a minor.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, if there's a 3-point something, then that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, that fixes something else, too, that I need for another PR, the multiplexing node.
Okay. So that it's either that or we thought
if there's another minor release of CodeMirror, we should probably do that for 2.1.
Okay, but
we should actually check that for a few of the dependencies.
Okay.
Yeah. So the V4 JSON schema.
Yeah, so that's me. So I've been working on writing a JSON schema for the notebook format version 4 before any of the changes are actually coded. It's not quite finished yet, but it's almost there. So I sort of just wanted to let everyone know that that's almost ready for review, and that then I guess once that's done, to ask about what the sort of next step would be. Would it be to create a version 4 branch and then just slowly make changes into that, or?
Yeah, probably. So we'll want to implement V4 from just mostly copy V3 and then make the changes there. I think a lot of the Python API, like the programmatic composition interface for new output and everything, should bear very little resemblance to what we currently do. Mm-hmm. Because there are a lot of problems with the way we do that, but at least in terms of talking to the file, it should mostly be the same.
Okay.
And then it will just be changing things in in the JavaScript for saving, there are some transforms. So we already have a couple shims where in memory we're working with MIME type keys and renamed message types. Probably you don't want to touch the JavaScript part, at least until after the message spec PR is merged.
Okay.
Because it'll touch a lot of the same bits.
Uh-huh.
And then there are some shims for actually transforming what's in memory to what's on disk.
Okay.
And basically you just remove those. Should be a significant and then removing the worksheet and all that stuff.
In any case, we want the V3 to V4 back and forth ready before doing anything with JavaScript, maybe, right?
Yeah, that's probably true. So having the translation from V3 to V4 would probably be the first step, having the conversion.
Yeah.
I see. Widget-related changes to be determined. Yeah, I was going to say we have.
Yeah, adding little things. It's like the message spec changes. That adding new things we can do bit by bit.
Yes.
But defining the major breaking changes we should do in kind of a.
Yeah. There's some other things that are on the addition side of the notebook format that we probably want to do for V4. The ones that I know of are mostly new metadata keys. One is tags for cells and notebooks, and the other is metadata keys for hiding outputs and inputs.
Like the collapsed or...
it's basically a more fine-grained version of collapsed, right? Collapsed only applies to the whole cell, and this.
But this is metadata. It's all optional. It's just don't need it in the spec.
Well, but I mean, we already have. Do we have any metadata that is non-optional, or that I mean, obviously metadata is never required, but
I think if there's something that is like sort of defined as like possible to be used somewhere else, it seems like it's a good idea to include it at least like in the schema, so like there's a record of saying like if you're using this particular type of metadata, this is how like we're going to expect it to be used.
Yeah, because it can be because you can specify that things are optional in the.
Right.
Yes. No. It's obviously optional, but I don't. For example, I think we should decide on one way that tags are specified for cells and for the notebook, and that there should be no question when that metadata key is defined, the format is known.
I think Matthias had an IPEP for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's IPEP. What is it?
I think it's in your pull request. There is a comment with the IPEP link.
IPEP 20, yeah.
So I haven't looked at this pull request. So we have this V4 JSON schema. Are we checking notebooks against that schema, or
no? Because there aren't any V4 notebooks. Don't exist yet. The code to write V4 notebooks doesn't exist yet.
Okay. This is just the schema.
This is the very first thing we do is define what we're actually going to make, and then when we make it, then we'll be able to make sure that we're actually making what we say we're making.
And
which for V3 generally has not actually been the case.
And what I'm wondering is, are we planning on improving that situation so that it's easier to test notebooks against the schema, or that we do it all the time, or?
Jess already did that during PyCon. Yeah,
so there was like the NB validate stuff, which never like actually got ran like routinely. It was just there. Exactly. So I changed that so that now whenever the notebook is read or written, it will run it through the NB validate code and print out if there's any errors. So it won't actually like throw an error. It'll just print it out to the terminal where the notebook is running. Like we could also include, like a command that makes it easier to like run it if you want to do it manually, and then like have it print out what the errors actually are. But that framework is now in place, so it should be like easier to verify that notebooks conform to the schema.
Oh, and what type of performance hit is the validation?
I didn't test it on any like really big notebooks, so I am not entirely sure. But at least for moderate-sized notebooks, it didn't seem to make a big difference. I didn't test that like numerically, so I can do that and report back.
Yeah, we probably.
Since it's not, so it won't add an extra serialization or deserialization step. and it doesn't need to look at the contents of things like image data.
So you think it'll be pretty fast?
Yeah, I think it will definitely be strictly faster than notebook signing by a lot.
Okay.
Right, because just iterating through, if you've got a notebook with 1,000 cells, iterating through 1,000 elements in a list and then 10 elements on dictionaries in that list is not a huge operation.
Okay. And the library which does this validation is an optional dependency for IPython?
It's in external, so we ship a copy.
Oh,
So zero dependency.
Oh, okay. So we do ship that library. Okay. Okay. Great. No, thanks so much for working on this, Jess. This is fantastic. I'm just thinking out loud. Another possibility. I guess that I was thinking, maybe we wanted to separate notebook validation from reading and writing, but it's difficult to imagine how we would do that in a sane way that actually.
I mean, we had the tool, we never used it.
No.
It's separate in the sense that like you don't have to read or write it. I mean, the reading and writing functions have a call to the validation. They don't have to necessarily. You could just read the JSON in manually and then run it through the validator.
Yeah, no.
So
I was just thinking, like, well, gosh, maybe when the dashboard gets navigated to a directory, we want to validate all notebooks in that directory. Like, do it a little more preemptively.
I don't think validation on, because that's something that would be really expensive, right? Because then you're adding open and read operations that you aren't doing normally.
Yeah.
And that, right? If you've got a directory full of
big notebooks,
especially if you've built a habit based on the fact that you didn't used to be able to navigate.
Yeah.
You've got 150 notebooks, and you're doing YT stuff, so your notebooks are like 20 megs.
Actually, here's a thought. Are we signing enough of the notebook that we could use the signature to detect whether or not that notebook has been validated?
It doesn't make sense because someone could change a signature and have an invalid notebook which is signed with a valid signature. Because you signed the notebook.
Brian, our current signing doesn't include enough of the notebook content to
that's what I was
to validate it. We could sign based on everything, but Min was saying that computing the signature is more expensive than doing the validation. So.
Yeah, and we are right now omitting the big parts of the notebook in the signing, and so okay. I was just thinking out loud to try to understand the problem space, but okay.
While we're on version 4, I know we had this argument last cycle as well. I'm going to get my oar in early. I think if IPython 3 is saving in version 4 by default, then we should backport for IPython 2.2 or whatever the version 4 to version 3 machinery.
I think that was agreed upon.
Yeah, I think that makes. I mean, at this point, we're mature enough, and there's enough V3 notebooks out there. I don't think we can afford to not do that.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah,
because it's just in ND format code.
Yeah.
No, I had one question on the basically the one last thing that needs to be done before the first draft of the spec is finished. It has to do with how the metadata the MIME types are specified in things like display data and like what was formerly PyOut. Is that like that there is a property called whatever the MIME type is, and then under that property is the actual data? Because that's a little bit harder to support in the JSON schema.
Yeah, essentially what it is so right now we have a whitelist of keys that are like JSON PNG, JPEG, and the proposal is to just rename those keys to the keys that they actually arrive as. So PNG is actually image PNG, JPEG is actually image JPEG.
Yeah.
And all MIME types are valid.
Right. But so because that's like the name of the property itself, it makes it a little bit harder to like include in the schema.
Yeah, it does.
Like, would it be too much of a change to have it be something like have a property called MIME type, which then holds the MIME type, and then a property called like data or something like that, which then actually holds the data itself?
So each output.
And that would allow to get also metadata on a per output basis instead of having the metadata separated and redo the merge after.
Well, but this would mean that the overall output structure would be a sequence rather than something that you could key into, right? Basically, it would be a sequence of dicts rather than a dictionary.
And sequence of dicts which would be unique based on one of their properties.
Exactly, and so
I think it currently is I want to say it currently is a list.
So the outputs is a list, but each output is keyed by MIME type.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And what you're proposing would make each individual output also a list.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem is that,
so to fully validate it, then you'd have to check that like the MIME type key is unique within that list.
yeah.
You can do that with just the like a unique. There's a unique keyword that you can use to specify that.
I mean, the problem is that it introduces order n operations all over the place.
Yeah, but n is like 4.
Yeah, no, I know n is small, but
Actually, in most cases, n is 1 or 2.
We can have just a separate function that tests for that, not in the schema validator.
Yeah,
using.
Yeah, I think validating the MIME type data is probably not a strong enough case to change that. I think reorganizing having the metadata next to the data has a larger benefit.
Remind me of how we currently store metadata in this part.
So right now, basically, there's 2 dictionaries next to each other. So as a message comes over the wire, there are 2 MIME type key dictionaries, data and metadata.
Yes.
And they can have the same structure.
Yes.
But I mean, that's orthogonal, I think, from the making it a sequence, because you could have a dict keyed by MIME type, which then the value was another dict with content and metadata.
Yes, that's true. But that I think bringing the metadata over, so changing that shape is something we can consider, because there are various other benefits.
How does the new message spec handle that?
That's not changed.
Okay,
that hasn't changed. Part of the reason for the plain MIME type stuff is for the outputs to better match the message spec. That there shouldn't be so many transforms, especially lossy ones.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important.
But I think it's worth thinking. I'm not sure there's a change to make, but it's worth thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, let's keep talking about it.
Yeah, associating one of the things that is definitely not awesome in how we do it now is associating. So if you want to publish an image with a specified width and height, the way we do it is not awesome, because it's like at the Python level, you say here is image data, and here's the width and height for that image data, and then it goes to this display formatters, and then it builds one big multi-mime type display message, separates those two things, publishes the image data in the data dict under image PNG, and publishes the metadata in the metadata dict under image PNG, and then they arrive. Those two big dicts arrive on the JavaScript side, and they get passed along side by side. And there's a bunch of navigation of I'm doing PNG. Let me look in the metadata dict for PNG metadata.
Okay, well let's think about this, because that would be, now's the time to make those changes for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That's what we got.
And let's see, there's notes. So there's PyData tomorrow. So IPython will be at PyData. We have a tutorial on Friday morning. And then both Min and Thomas are giving talks on what days?
Me and Paul together.
Yeah, Thomas and Paul together tomorrow, or on Saturday.
And Paul. Okay.
Yeah, and then I'm talking on Sunday.
Sunday. Okay. Well, we will see you guys shortly. Will you guys arrive? Are you staying over on that side of the bay, or are you going back and forth?
No, I'm staying at home. I'm not sure if I'm going to come tomorrow. I might, but I'll definitely be there Saturday and Sunday.
Thomas or Paul, are you going to be there tomorrow morning?
I'm planning to be there. Yes.
Okay.
I can't be there. I have to. I'll be there Friday night.
Okay. I don't know if you're around.
You guys have dinner plans Friday night. Sorry, Brian, you broke up. Say it again.
Thomas, if you're available to help, sort of at least in the early part of the tutorial, to get people's systems running and stuff, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'll try to be there in the morning and come home early-ish.
Okay.
But
I wanted to update people on the documentation tutorial content. So we talked briefly with Min the other day, and as John and I were preparing the tutorial, basically what we ran into is that over the last month I've been doing a lot of work in the examples directory to update our documentation and organize it and improve it. And previously, a lot of the content in examples and our IPython in-depth repository that we use for tutorials was maybe 90 to 95% the same, but because there's two copies, we slowly sort of just make changes independently in one of those locations, and so the content is slowly diverging, and it basically means we have to write the same content twice. And I think Min definitely feels, and I agree with him, that in principle, written narrative documentation and tutorial content, they have different usage cases, and in many cases they should be different. But right now, the sort of inherent fluctuations in our documentation are much, much larger than those subtleties. And so I think for now it would be good to have a common set of materials that could be used for our written documentation and tutorials, and then to have tutorial content that is sort of in addition to that adds the tutorial specific things. And so over the last few days, John and I have basically completely rewritten much of the tutorial content and IPython examples. And the workflow we're using is not wonderful. I think over time we'll want to modify it. But basically, all of our narrative notebooks are now only in IPython examples. The exercises and tutorial specific stuff is still in IPython in depth. and then we have a fab file in IPython in depth that manually copies whitelisted notebooks from examples to IPython in depth. Basically, it's a manual synchronization of that content.
So do those other notebooks, are they tracked in IPython in depth or not?
They are, yes.
Okay, so you're not authoring them there, but they're still there.
Yes, and
okay.
I thought about doing a Git submodule, and there's I think two issues. One,
submodules are not the best for tutorial audiences.
Exactly, and the other is that we want the tutorial-specific content, like the exercises, to actually be interleaved with the narrative content that gets pulled over.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're slowly working on this. The improvements we're making to the documentation are huge. I mean, we really have rewritten a lot of stuff and sort of consolidated all these different versions of things. And so I think the situation will be much better. I would say for now, if John and I can hold a global lock on both of those, well, the IPython examples directory and then the IPython in depth repo, we've made it through most of the interactive widget, the notebook documentation, and the IPython kernel documentation. We've not gotten to consolidating the parallel computing stuff, customization, or embedding. And so there's still more work to be done even after PyData. But for PyData, those other directories should be mostly refactored and ready to go. So I don't know. I mean, that's what we're up to.
Yeah, I think it's hard to. I mean, we talked about it. Yes, I think it is hard to have single content for multiple uses.
It is, and part of what we're finding is that there's some cases where there's clearly an exercise.
Yeah.
That exercise doesn't really belong in the narrative written documentation. It's clearly teaching material designed for a student. You know, there's actually a percent load solution. There's other content that sort of sits halfway between. It could appear as an actual example. It's not really tutorial style narrative. It's more of a here's a longer example that shows how to do something. It's not really an exercise in the sense that it's too involved in multi-step for a user to do in the context of a hands-on tutorial. You know, and in some cases we're just putting those as examples in the examples directory and then copying them over. But we're trying to just make these decisions and learn about, okay, what different types of content are there, what's the best place to put them, etc.
Yeah.
So that,
okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I don't have any immediate plans to work on those things, so having the lock is fine.
Okay. Okay, actually, one other thing. I've also pulled the notebook-related documentation that's in Sphinx over to this content.
Okay.
There was a lot. So eventually I will submit a pull request that removes the notebook-related documentation from Sphinx entirely and simply links to these notebooks.
Does that include all the security stuff?
I've not ported that over yet.
But that's going to?
Yes.
I don't think that's a good idea.
The reason I ask is because we have links on the web page to that.
Yeah, and I don't think those links should be to NB Viewer or something. I think that if you want to move those over to notebooks, a criterion for that is getting notebooks as input to Sphinx. Like, I think those should be in statically rendered in our static docs. Things like security and starting a notebook server.
Well, but again, it gets back to just the raw duplication of content. I mean, we had like, I think take starting a notebook, for example, we had some information in Sphinx.
I'm not saying that none of the information should move, but I think definitely the security one shouldn't move.
Okay.
And probably some of the others.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what others. I don't really remember what's in there.
Yeah, I mean, and people just have to look to see what I've done. And
yeah.
You know, I mean, for example, running the notebook server, I think we had Sphinx and then 3 other notebooks that had overlapping and in some cases conflicting information. I mean, it was just an absolute mess. And so now we have one and only one notebook that covers all aspects of running a notebook server.
Okay.
So, but no, I mean, but I agree that the linkability of everything, there's certain things that we don't want to move because of how we're linking to them from other locations.
Yeah.
And I think the security one is a good example of that. All right. Anything else we need to cover?
Don't think so.
All right. Well, we will see some of you at PyData this weekend. And
we will see all of each other.
Yes. John and I probably will not be here next week. We'll be visiting Chris Keys to work on IPython stuff. And I don't know if Fernando will be back next week or not. Probably not.
Not really. Not in any effect.
He's doing like flying visits to us for the next month or so, I think.
Yeah.
He's going to helicopter in.
Yeah.
Well, Fernando, hi. We hope everything is well for you. Wherever.
Hope you're enjoying the various hotel rooms.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
I opened a PR fixing the keyboard stuff. I pinged you and John.
Yeah. Fixed before the end of the meeting.
Now that is response.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Uh-huh.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Internet.
See you soon.